Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. I have no doubt that reading a financial statement has made many individuals unhappy. It's very definitely a regular occurrence and it's undoubtedly caused much greater calamities than mine, but it didn't help at all. I was simply going through some documents on my wife's desk at home, trying to figure out if she had paid the phone bill or anything similar, something simple and harmless. That's when I discovered it, hidden behind a pile of invoices and other items, a bank statement from Hamilton's Bank, as it happened. I probably only saw that because we handle all of our business with United Trust Bank, and the blue hue in the headline drew my attention. I suppose she'd picked another bank to keep it concealed, which was ironic given that the difference prompted me to take notice and flick through it. First, I examined the name at the top, which read Lena Harper. Not surprising, but the address, I had never heard of it. We resided somewhere along Chicago's North Shore, far south of Seattle. Next, I examined the number at the bottom, $17,546. A clean balance, but where did it come from? I had no clue. Then I looked at the list of transactions from the previous 3 months and was astounded by the consistent high quantities of money that had been pouring into it. 600 one day, over 1,000 a week later, 800 only 6 days later, and so on. Now, I earn a solid salary from my business and am used to large quantities of money, but Lena only worked part-time for a public relations firm, an odd afternoon or evening, at most a weekend, stepping in for someone at some event. Even then, it was mostly for enjoyment, since it didn't pay well. When I looked at the list of rewards, I was extremely surprised. Every month, the same amount of money was taken out by standing order, $567. The amount sounded too familiar. I strolled up to a cabinet, a magnificent, old-fashioned roll-top from the late 19th century, opened it, and took out my wife's file cabinet. She was always immaculate and precise, and Lena and I knew precisely where to look since we shared everything. There were no secrets between us. Or there hadn't been until then. I located the United Trust Bank statements and rapidly looked through them until I found what I was looking for, having no qualms about going through her bank data, which she provided me on a regular basis. There it was in plain and white, her agency salary, $567 per month. I was utterly lost. It seemed that Lena was paying her own wages from her own bank account. Why the heck would she do that? Did she really have a job? Where on earth did the money originate? Was this anything to be concerned about, and was it any of my business? It was like hell. What was Lena up to? I retrieved the Hamilton's Bank statement again and examined it more closely, recognizing that the only money ever removed seemed to be the monthly payments. The payments in were erratic, numerous, but without a pattern. It suddenly dawned to me that there was a lot more money going in than flowing out, so I checked the balance at the bottom of the last page. It wasn't quite $17,546. I had overlooked a zero, and the total was $175,460. My name is Jake Collins. I'm 35 years old, pretty decent, and manage my own computer company with 2 employees. My wife, Lena, is 26 years younger than me, which I believe is an appropriate age gap. I provide her my level of maturity, life experience, and a very nice living. She offers me her youthfulness, her abundant beauty, and all the joy in the world. We both offer each other unconditional love, both spiritually and physically. We are both, without a doubt, still head over heels in love with each other after 4 years of marriage, as I was from the first day. I'd been up in Chicago for a meeting with a person to negotiate a deal with Technovate, and I was sitting in the hotel bar afterwards, thinking about the potential benefits of going along with their proposal. When Lena stepped in, my insides flipped. It's not like I didn't have a girlfriend. In fact, I probably had too many, although none of them were very exceptional. I knew Lena might be exceptional, but only if I got to know her. Lena was 56 tall, slim, with nice, shapely tan legs that seemed to go on forever, from the dainty high heels on her feet until they disappeared under the very short cocktail dress she wore. She had longish dark hair and deep brown eyes with a cute little turned-up nose. My dream girl wasn't a classic beauty, but she didn't need to be, and every man in the place must have been eyeing her up, no doubt with similar thoughts to my own. She simply oozed breeding, elegance. I smiled back and greeted her, wondering what the heck to do next, but I didn't have to worry about it. A grin that would have lighted up the street outside flashed over her face, and she stepped toward me, hinting that maybe. "Hi, you must be Mark," she said. To my amazement, I said, "Jake, not Mark." "Mark, Jake, what's the difference?" She laughed, and I wasn't going to fight with her. "Can I sit down?" she inquired in her slightly clipped, very British upper-class, but quite charming accent. Of course, I replied, leaping up to pull the chair back for her. Even the way she sat down showed class, as if she had been taught how to do it at some posh finishing school. I wondered why me, what had I done to earn the attention of this dream on legs of a woman, and how on earth she knew my name. "I'm Lena," she continued, "and I apologize for being late, I was held up." "Thank you for waiting." She then glanced at me and said, "Are you okay, Jake?" I was fine, but she later laughed when she told me that I had looked totally shocked. I recovered quickly, however, and within moments we were engaged in gentle banter, delighted to discover that we shared so many interests, the same music, tennis, Indian food, and, believe it or not, rugby. Lena was an educated woman who could speak about a wide range of subjects, unlike the others I had recently been with. When her phone rang, she excused herself and answered, saying, "No, I am here." "No, he is here as well." "Could not be. Has here with me." "Oh my goodness." "Hang on," she asked me, her grin returning to her exquisite features. "Were you expecting me?" she asked. "No, but I'm glad you showed up," I said cheekily. "You are not Mark Harper at all, are you?" she inquired, laughing. "No, I'm Jake Collins," I said. She laughed again and raised her phone. "I was late, and I've got the wrong Mark or Jake, actually," she muttered into it. Her use of profanities with her aristocratic accent was wonderful, sounded so out of place, but so natural. She turned her head and half covered her mouth, so I couldn't hear the next few exchanges between her and whoever was on the other end of the line. I knew I was going to lose her in the next few minutes, and I desperately tried to think of something witty to say the moment she ended the call. Then Lena looked back at me, still holding the phone, that smile, verging on a grin, spreading back across her face. "No, he's quite cute, actually," she remarked into the phone, looking right at me to make sure I could hear, rather good-looking in a rugged sort of way. I believe I may have blushed. "Okay, then. Give him my apologies the next time he visits the UK. Maybe." She completed her chat and slipped her phone back into her purse. "Well then," she continued, "it seems that I have missed my appointment." "Never mind. It'll last." Her smile never faded. "Assuming you're available this evening, what do you fancy doing? How about we do it together?" I didn't tell her what my first option would have been, so I proposed we eat dinner instead. She gladly agreed, and that's precisely what we did, the finest meal of my life, and I hardly noticed what we ate since I was already under her spell. Lena told me about her career in public relations, how she set up meetings, organized discreet gatherings, and assisted her agency in putting people in the right place at the right time. She clearly enjoyed it, and I was already hoping she would love me as much. After the meal, I walked her back to the taxi rank, overjoyed to see that there was a small line and that I would have more time to talk, and this time, to hold her. I put my arm around her, and she snuggled up, sliding her arm around my waist and cuddling up to me. I kissed her lightly on the cheek, and she returned the favor, the sweet smell of her sending my senses into overdrive. Then she looked around, maneuvered me between her and the others in the queue, put her arms up around my neck, and pulled me down until our lips met. Heaven. Just the briefest of touches, but it was like discovering the land of milk and honey, and I had the honey in my arms. I got carried away and almost embarrassed myself as I kissed her more hungrily, running my hands over her back, feeling the soft curve as it descended down to her bottom. "Hey, hold on, hang on." She sobbed, then smiled. "Can't you give a girl a chance? We've only recently met." I pulled back, disappointed but not irritated. She was a special girl, worth the effort and the wait. "Sorry," I said, got carried away. She laughed sweetly again before saying, "Kiss me carefully. It'll be worthwhile in the long term." I was lost, and I believe it was then that I fell in love with my wife, Lena. On our first accidental date, I suggested we go back to my hotel for a nightcap, but she refused, teasing me that I was looking for something more, and that a first date was too soon. "Can I see you again?" I inquired, and she tortured me again, humming and hawing about whether it would be worthwhile, all the while clutching onto me, pressing me against her gorgeous, lean body and driving me insane with need. Okay, she said finally, shrugging her gorgeous shoulders. I'll call you. What is your number? I don't trust you, I stated frankly. Give me yours and I'll call you. No can do, Jake, Lena said gently. I don't give out my phone number, particularly to gorgeous strangers. I will call you. We reached an agreement to meet on the following Tuesday, which was too long for me but the earliest she could manage. What was I going to do with this newfound knowledge about my wife's affairs? Why did she have all this money and where did it come from? Sure, her parents were rich, owned an estate down in Connecticut, hunted and shot pheasants, and owned a fair share of one of the smaller merchant banks, one that had survived the aftermath of the Big Bang as well, so obviously, the family was well connected. There was no reason why my wife wouldn't have money, even sums like that, but I'd question her, but I knew I couldn't. If she was keeping it from me, there had to be a reason, and I had to find out what it was. I had to confess that it scared me a little, even if it seemed implausible. It seemed like Lena was involved in some kind of shady arrangement. I had to go down to Chicago a few days later, so I looked up the address on the statement. It was a swanky area full of money, old money, just the sort of place Lena's family would feel at ease in. I looked at the brass plates on the door, but none of them meant anything. Corporate agency and elite circle agency were the only ones that caught my eye, and the others appeared to be accountants or stockbrokers. I waited around for a while, but no one arrived or left. I had drawn a blank and didn't know how to proceed. All I could do was confront her, but that didn't appeal at all. She was hiding something from me, and it appeared that her family was involved. I needed to find out what, and perhaps more importantly, why. Our second date was memorable, and I remember quite clearly what she wore, the tight denim jeans and white sweater, which would have looked good on any attractive woman. Pierre Cardin just has that ability, but on Lena, it was stunning. I'm sure designers like him got their inspiration from women like my wife, and perhaps it was a woman like Lena who launched 1,000 ships. We went to the theater, then to a late dinner, which was fantastic, and I had no idea what we ate. After that, the two of us walked down the banks of the Thames, arm in arm, as lovers have done throughout history. I sort of assumed she would return to my hotel, which she did, and I sort of assumed she would come up to my room, which she did, and I sort of assumed she would join me in bed, but she didn't. She wouldn't. Not that we didn't have a good time, or that I couldn't persuade her to take off her sweater. Her firm breasts were everything and more than I could have hoped for. She grabbed me, kissed me passionately, forcing her tongue in between my lips, twirling it around mine. The mere taste of her sent me into a trance. My fingers began to undo the top button, and she gasped, cried out her pleasure as she ground herself against me. Then she came to a halt, possibly realizing how far we had traveled and where it might go. No, please, no, she said softly, gripping my hand but unable to take it away. I'm not ready. Not yet. Please don't. It was possibly the most difficult decision I had ever made in my life, and I stopped, pulled back. She made no attempt to stop me, almost daring me to defy her, looking at me imploringly, but trusting me not to. The moment was over, and we cuddled up, kissing and holding each other tightly. We were grown-ups. I was in my 30s and she was in her 20s, but she wasn't ready just yet. I inquired what the issue was, if there was one, and she nodded, mumbled, yes, and fell into sobs. What can you do if you love the woman? And by then, I surely did. You accept it. I hugged her closely, talked to her gently, and assured her everything was okay. We lay there like that, and my desire slowly faded, leaving just my love for her behind. After almost an hour, she sighed, stood up, apologized, and tears began to flow down her cheeks once again. I'm sorry, she said with a rasp. I'm in such a mess. Such an awful mess. You have no idea. No idea at all. I drew her close to me, the closer the better, hoping that all of her difficulties would go away, and they did, for the time being. Thank you, Jake, she finally said. You are the most wonderful man. She kissed me, and everything seemed fine. We stayed there cuddling for a while, but it had to end, and I found myself escorting her out to the taxis once more. 1 a.m. and still no sex, but I'd never felt so bloody good in my life. I considered confronting Lena with the problem of where all the money had come from and why she was paying herself at such a large sum. At best, it could be from her family, maybe cash they were stashing away from the taxman. That took my fancy for some time, but it was too easy, too convenient, and I knew there was more to it. I had no other explanation, nothing at all, just a knot building up in my stomach that not all was as it seemed, and that I was in for a major. I followed her all the way to Chicago one evening when she was off on one of her jobs for the PR firm, keeping her Lexus carefully in my sights to see if she really did go to the hotel where her company had set up some meeting or if she would slip away to meet someone sinister. But no, there she was, pulled up outside the correct hotel, good as gold, elegantly stepping out of her car and handing the keys to some attendant. Nothing to get upset about, and several hours I resolved to just ask her. The explanation would surely be quite simple. I'd asked her that very night when she returned, however late it might be. But she didn't return that night. I woke up in the morning, the ring of the phone bringing me back into the real world, away from my tormented sleep, as I raised myself from the sofa where I had spent the night waiting for her return. "Hi, Jake," she murmured, her face beaming with joy. "Sorry, got really tied up in some discussions last night, and the company paid for a room at the hotel for me. Went well, though. Be back before lunchtime. How about lunch at the Oak Tavern and I'll tell you about it. Why didn't you call me last night?" I questioned, my voice full of concern. "I've been worried." "I did," she continued with worry, but there was no answer. "I left a message." I glanced down, and sure enough, the message light was blinking on the phone. She must have rang while I was on my way back from Chicago, and I hadn't seen when I came in, with all the other things on my mind. I agreed to meet her at the Oak Tavern, but I was still perplexed. I felt the world closing in on me, and I didn't know what to do or say. The following week, I followed her again, feeling like a traitor, and hating myself for the suspicion I felt and the ideas that were penetrating my mind. Our third date was a defining moment for me. I had been looking forward to it like an adolescent, hoping against hope that everything would go well. I hoped to get her into bed, but more than that, I hoped that the date would go well, that she would be happy and that the awkward tensions of our previous date would not resurface. We met in neutral ground, halfway between Chicago and Seattle, at a lovely little place that I had discovered some months before. It was an inspired ch. "Do they have rooms here, Jake?" she inquired, and my prayers seemed answered. It was difficult to describe how wonderful that night was, but I'll try. I was no virgin, by a long way, but it seemed that I had discovered one. A rare find in one so beautiful, already in her 20s. She was so nervous as I undressed her, as if I had been the first one to ever do so. Shivering as I undid her dress and allowed it to drop to the floor, I rested her down on the bed, determined that if it was her first time, she would never forget it. Her breathing was heavy and quick, and her eyes were closed. Jake, please, Jake," she moaned huskily, but the rest was lost as a shiver passed through her exquisite body that could only have been one thing. Her body relaxed, and she laid back, opening her eyes at last and staring up at me with an expression that told it all. "I love you, Jake. I really adore you." My wife mumbled uncertainly, "I think I'm ready now. Please be gentle." Then we had a fantastic night. I took back control from her, retreating just a bit while I made love to her, and she returned it wholeheartedly. We lay peacefully in one another's arms, loving one another's nakedness, both satiated and fulfilled. "Thank you, Jake," Lena said softly against my chest. "Thank you, my love." I kissed her and told her how much I loved her, too. "I needed that, Jake," she remarked after a few seconds. "I've needed that for a long time, and I'm just so glad it was you." The second time I followed Lena, it was even easier. I knew the hotel where her meeting was scheduled, and I let Lena get ahead of me, arriving half an hour or so later and wondering what the hell I was doing there and what I was going to do. I slinked into the reception area, terrified that she would spot me, having no idea what explanation I could possibly make for my being there. She wasn't there, of course, and why should she be? So I made my way to the bar, peeping in, but Lena was there in the bar, conversing with some guy. She was seated with her back to me, but I knew it was her, and the man she was talking to looked American, much older than Lena, maybe in his late 50s, expensively dressed and perfectly groomed. I felt the tension drain out of me as I realized that he was exactly what he should be, a rich client of the agency, obviously some businessman with whom she was discussing some arrangements. I felt like a fool, cursing myself for suspecting that Lena had been involved with some man, even though I hadn't even allowed myself to admit to those thoughts until that moment. What was I to do? I was still no closer to the truth about the money, but at least my main fear had been allayed, and she wasn't having an affair. Maybe this guy had something to do with all the money she'd been hiding away, but I wasn't a super sleuth and had no way of progressing further. Go home, I thought to myself, and stop being so silly. Another few hours wasted driving up to Chicago and back just because of my stupid doubts. Lena stood up, and my stomach tightened. She looked fabulous and so sexy in a tight black mini dress that just skimmed below her bottom, leaving her long, slim legs so bare and molding around her body. Even from across the room, I could see she couldn't possibly have been wearing a bra. The tightness in my middle gripped even tighter, but it wasn't how gorgeous my wife looked, it was that I'd never seen that dress before, and it certainly wasn't the smart grey ski. My chest tightened, but I told myself I was being silly again, unreasonable. Why wouldn't she change for an evening meeting? Why shouldn't Lena look sexy to impress an important customer? Then she laughed at something he said and smiled at him, our smile, the one that would light up the street outside, the smile that I always imagined she reserved for me. Worse, she reached up to him and put her hand on his chest, playfully, coyly. When Lena reached up and kissed him on the cheek, my world went black. He bent down and returned the kiss, but directly on her lips, and the two of them held it for longer than any uncle and niece had a right to. I'd kill the prick, the scumsucker, the cheating scumsucker, but all I could do was stand there and watch Lena play up to him even more, cuddling up to him as he put his arm affectionately around her, grinning at him as she so often did to me, as he patted her bottom, molding her gorgeous body into his while he squeezed her tightly. I couldn't breathe. I needed air, but I couldn't leave, couldn't take myself away from the horrible sight unfolding in front of my eyes. They kissed again, this time with much more intensity, and Lena, my lovely, precious Lena, seemed blissfully lost in the company of this unknown guy. "Can I help you, sir?" I glanced around, and there was some uniformed flunky questioning my right to be there, questioning my right to see my beautiful wife make out with some scumbag stranger. He called for help, and three of them manhandled me out to the back in trance as I watched Lena go off with the stranger, laughing at his no doubt stupid bloody jokes, running her hand up and down his back, and making no objection as he reached down and grabbed the cheeks of her bum as if he owned it. "Go to hell," I exclaimed far too loudly. I found myself on the floor in a back alley, a few scratches on my face, but no serious harm done. I made my way back to the front and stormed back in, determined to confront her, to find out what was going on, but the security guys caught me again and threw me out on my ear, threatening to be less gentle if I didn't bugger off. Unwilling to listen to my pleas that my wife was in there with another man, I slinked off, searching hopelessly up at the windows, wondering what my wife, Lena, was in there somewhere, being screwed by her lover, and I was powerless to stop it again. And then, a flashback, after that last date, things went wonderfully. I felt like a teenager in love again, and it just never seemed to go away. Lena seemed the same, and I met her parents, who seemed overjoyed that someone had finally won her heart. We got married 8 months later, the biggest wedding I'd ever been to or ever likely to be, all paid for by her wealthy parents, who seemed more interested in making a good show than anything else. I vaguely tried to find out if she had some troubled past experience, why she had apparently still been a virgin in her 20s in this day and age, but she didn't want to discuss it, promising to tell me all about it one day. And we were so happy, so in love, that it didn't matter because everyone was happy for me, even my competitors, who were so touched that they didn't take too much advantage. It came as a wake-up call when we lost a big account, and I had to put a lot more effort into my business. I didn't neglect Lena, but she felt the difference. She had, I suppose, lost some of her spirit and acted a little down. "What's up, Lena love?" I asked for the 10th time, not expecting a rational response. She looked at me, groaned, and eventually told me. "I'm a bit bored," she said. "Not with you, not at all. You're wonderful." I smiled back at her, glad to hear it, even if our lovemaking had slowed somewhat in recent months. "I need something to interest me, keep my brain working," she went on. "Maybe I could do a bit of work for my old agency." She had ceased working for them shortly after our marriage and seemed to be happy, but there was clearly something lacking in her life recently. "Would they take you back? Have you asked them?" I inquired, hoping it would be a good idea. Lena grinned, and I knew her mind was made up, and I had no argument, even if I could think of one. They've rung me every month since we were married. They are desperate for me to go back, she sung out loud. I've sort of suggested that I might go back and do a bit, just part-time. She returned to Chicago the next week to visit them, and a few days later, she began conducting some afternoon meetings for them. She came home that evening full of smiles, pleased as could be. She'd had a fantastic day, and everything was back on track in the Collins family. I had nothing to complain about as Lena rediscovered her zest for life and the energy for sex, even more than before, though I wouldn't have thought it possible. Lena had always liked straightforward sex, which I put down to her lack of experience, shying nervously away from anything out of the ordinary, but from then on, she became liberated, totally prepared to try anything. It was surprising how naturally good she was at it all and how much she enjoyed it. I had no idea why I deserved this unrivaled pleasure, but I didn't worry about it, and I just enjoyed it. The next 3 years or so were incredible, and we spent every possible spare moment together. I pined when she was out for the evening, even more so when she was away for a whole weekend in Paris, Chicago, or wherever. But her job took her primarily to Chicago, and whenever I could, I tried to arrange something so that I could meet him. Then I found that bank statement, and everything changed. I couldn't believe she was cheating on me, but the evidence was there. I'd seen her kissing and cuddling up to her boyfriend in the hotel, his hand on her ass, his fingers disappearing up under the back of her short dress, and there was no doubt in my mind that they had ended up inside it. The thought of that brought tears of frustrated rage to my eyes. I remember her saying that one of the directors was an American, but I couldn't understand how she could cheat on me like this. What was so special about this American guy? What did he have that I didn't? Was he a better tool or what? Damn it, he was 20 years older than me, 30 years older than her. Maybe it was someone she worked with, but he looked well off, so perhaps it was her boss. Bosses aren't allowed those liberties, not unless. My head ran around in circles till I felt like crying. Maybe this had been going on for a long time, maybe that's why she wanted to return to work for them, maybe. Oh, darn it, I didn't know what to believe. I couldn't take it anymore. It was a Friday morning, the morning after I'd been thrown out of the hotel, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I'd heard Lena's car arrive home in the early hours, and I wondered how many other times she'd come home this late when she'd been with him without me knowing, when I was fast asleep. It was some time before she came up to bed, and even in the gloom, I could make out that she had already changed into her nightgown, maybe showered in the spare bedroom as well. I still hoped for an explanation, and that in the morning, she'd laugh about it and tell me about the stupid jerk who tried to take advantage of her. She cuddled up to my back, but I pretended to be asleep, refusing to be roused from my slumbers, even as she cuddled up close, wrapped her arms around me, and kissed the back of my neck. I didn't think we'd ever sleep together again, much alone make love, so it was a relief to me when she finally gave up, and presumably to her as well, since she wouldn't have to pretend longer. I got up and dressed before she was, but I hadn't had the same intense evening she had. "Hi, sweetie," she cried out as she breezed into the living room. Her beauty almost had me reconsider my plans. "How are you this morning?" I didn't say anything, just sat there impassively, my pulse pounding. She turned around at me, the cup in her hand smashing back to the table as it dropped through her fingers. "What on earth happened to you?" she exclaimed, her worry apparently real. The 2 bruises that had been added to the wounds on my face from the second time I'd been kicked out were clearly a bit of a shock. Lena attempted to rush to my side, but I stopped her with my hand. Maybe the expression on my face had more to do with it. "What's up, Jake? What happened?" she said quickly. "I got thrown out of a bar last night," I said. I did not receive the answer I expected, but I should have anticipated it. "You got thrown out of a bar?" she said in her posh English accent. "You stupid man, what did you do? Get drunk or something?" She laughed, almost giggled, as she pictured me, the pillar of respectability, being kicked out of a bar while inebriated. "Hope it wasn't the Oak Tavern, Jake," she told me. "We're supposed to be going there tomorrow night." The smile on her face faded as she realized I wasn't smiling back. From now on, I would enjoy this little conversation and, in some little way, make her suffer for what she had done to me. "What's up, Jake?" she said simply. "Sit down," I said. "You may need to." I waited a few seconds, relishing the tension in her expression. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know what. "I wasn't thrown out of a pub, it was a bar," I said slowly. "A hotel bar." she inquired, unsure of the direction of the discussion. No, I told you. Not Cambridge. Chicago. The North Shore. Sort of Knightsbridge way. I observed a quiver on her lips, nothing more, but the mention of Knightsbridge surprised her. That was where she had spent the night. Whose hotel, she inquired, but she had already lowered her eyes. I believe she knew what was coming. The Grand Central, I murmured quietly. It's just off the square. Maybe you know it, Lena. Maybe you've been there recently. Lena ran her hand over her forehead and then glanced up, attempting to put a grin on her face. She had no idea how much I knew, and neither did I. Okay, so I was there last night, she murmured, before speaking louder and more firmly. Christ, Jake, you knew I was going there, didn't you? There, I told you so. I always tell you where I'm going. What's this all about? It's about who you were with, I said, remaining cool on the outside but boiling on the inside. She stared directly at me, unsure what to answer. A client. Just a client, Lena finally responded, but her voice shook. I believe she realized she had lost. And do all your clients get to feel your ass? I questioned with a slightly higher tone. Do they all treat you as if they own you? Do they all get kissed like they were your lover? Lena glanced at me, her face melted, and she broke into tears. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was grief, our heartbreak. I still loved her, you know, and I fought the impulse to run to her, hold her, and tell her everything was okay, not to worry about it. It was too late for that. I paused because I knew I couldn't express what came next. What she said next may have an impact. She glanced up after a time, still sniffing back tears, and whispered, I love you, Jake. Then she broke into tears again, sadness coursing through her whole body. I waited until she was calm again, waiting for her to speak first. What did you see, Jake? She said timidly. I'll tell you what I saw, you witch, I said, my voice trembling with frustration. I saw you smile at him and kiss him. I saw you stroking his back and him fondling your backside, which you didn't seem to object to. I saw the two of you going off arm in arm towards the stairs with his hand halfway up the back of your dress. That's what I saw. I suppose you were off to his bedroom, am I right? Lena looked at me regretfully, sadder than I'd ever seen her. She opened her lips to reject it, but stopped, knowing it was a waste of time, and then she bowed her head just enough to accept that my concerns were right. Her eyes were filled with sadness. I suppose you screwed one another, screwed away all night, and then had the damn cheek to come back here smelling of him, I quipped. That's not true, she lamented. I didn't come back like that. I showered before leaving the hotel. I'd never do that to you. I promise. I wasn't sure what her assurances were worth anymore, so I kept going. Then why did you get changed in the other room? I finally said. Why didn't you undress in our room like you normally would? I didn't want to wake you if you were sleeping, she said quickly. I didn't want to wake you up. Her explanation rang true, but it hardly exonerated her. And why was that? I said, my tone calm but steady. Because you didn't want me to know how late you were back, maybe, she muttered nearly inaudibly. I doubt this is the first time. I looked at her, and her silence confirmed my assumption. What do we do now, then, Lena? I questioned, after another lengthy stillness, the only sound being her sniffling as she fought to contain her feelings. I don't know, Jake, she said gently. But I do love you. You're the only one. Oh yes, Lena, I responded, my voice dripping with cynicism. In the only one you love, but you make love to some other guy behind my back. That's really convincing. I really believe that. It was just sex, she remarked with dignity. We didn't make love. Not love. It was just sex. Fun, exciting even, but just sex. And there's a difference. I asked her, is there? She just raised her eyebrows. Yes, there's a difference. A big difference. Please, Jake, understand. There's a big difference. This lover of yours, I continued, who is he? How long has this been going on? Weeks? Months? Or maybe years? I was in no condition to grasp the difference, and my wrath was becoming more difficult to manage. I only met him last night, Lena responded calmly, tears still streaming down her cheeks. I met him at the hotel. Probably only 5 or 10 minutes before you spotted us. Oh yes, and I'm supposed to believe that, am I? I let out a scream. I suppose he bought you a glass of wine, got you drunk, and took advantage of you, you poor little cow. No, she responded, getting choked up. It wasn't like that at all, Jake. I was working, she said quietly. He paid me to have sex with him. Lena's story hit me like a freight train. I suppose you all think him awful, and I can't blame you. It broke Jake's heart when I told him that the guy in the hotel had paid me for sex, that I was a call girl. I tried to tell him I wasn't, that I worked as an escort girl, but who was I kidding? Not even myself anymore. He called me a cheap prostitute, and that really hurt me. It made me cry. I can't stand the word prostitute, and I just can't think of myself. I had regulars, like the other girls, who came in once or twice a month. Some of them I'd known for years, a couple before I even met Jake, though I prayed to God that I'd never discover that fact. There were British, Americans, Canadians, and French, quite an international clientele. Mostly it was when they were visiting Chicago, usually on business, but they often invited me away for the weekend, and before I married Jake, sometimes a week or more. Golly, that always cost, but since I'd gotten married, it went straight into my secret bank account. I couldn't bring myself to touch any of that money, and it had long since been nothing to do with money anymore. That is, except for my so-called monthly salary, which was then transferred to my normal account to cover up what I was up to, and I made a point of letting Jake see that on a regular basis, to make sure he suspected nothing. Then he found that damn statement. I had been escorting when I met Jake, and even though I had stopped for over 8 months after we got married, it was like a drug, and I drifted back into it. Jake had stormed out of the house, crying like a baby, and I couldn't believe I could have hurt him so deeply. I don't know what I was thinking. I had no idea where he had gone or where he was living, and despite my calls, he refused to speak to me or even listen to me. I was desperate, almost suicidal, and though I understood his hurt, I knew he loved me, or at least had, and couldn't understand how he could cut me off so abruptly like that. I cut myself off from everyone and didn't have a friend in the world. I realized how my lifestyle had provided me with so many so-called friends, but none I could confide in. There was one, of course, but he refused to talk to me. Who could blame him? I turned down several dates and told them I wasn't feeling well. I must have sounded terrible on the phone, so I guess they believed me, and anyway, I was in no condition to entertain any man. To my shame, even then, I never considered telling them I was done with that way of life. I hope it was because I never thought about it clearly. After about 10 days of no contact, and Emily at his office politely declining my requests to be put through to him, I decided to go there. By then, I'd stopped crying all the time, and my eyes had recovered somewhat, but despite applying makeup, I still looked a mess. Though I'm quite pretty, I know I'm not naturally an outstanding beauty like some girls, but I've always been able to make the most of my appearance, and I'd had the best education money could buy. I'd become used to turning heads when I stepped into a room, and I loved it, but I didn't turn any that day. Christ, Lena, you look terrible, Emily remarked as I approached her desk. We had gotten rather friends over the previous several years, but she was hardly the model of discretion, so my appearance must have astonished her. Sorry, Jake is not here. When will he be back? I said, pushing back tears. Emily looked at me with sympathy, rose up, and softly grabbed my arm. Come on, she said me. Let's do a break. Let's go and get a coffee somewhere. Over coffee? I questioned, though I drank tea. She informed me that Jake had seen my vehicle drive into the parking lot and had gone out via the back door as I'd came in through the front. He told her we'd had a major fight, but didn't say why, which made me sigh with relief. He won't discuss it, she said. He's in a terrible state. Do you want to tell me what it's about? I can't, I said, but it's my fault, not his. That bad? Emily said with a knowing gaze. I said, worse than that, much worse. I think you need to find someone to talk to about this, she went on, someone close to you that you can trust. It was fantastic advice, but I had no one. I was close to my parents as an only child, but how do you start a discussion like that? I haven't mentioned it before, Daddy, but I've been working as a prostitute since I left Oxford University and my husband's just found out. No, it wasn't feasible. I had no one, and I'd have to figure it out on my own, but it didn't work out. The agency continued calling, and ultimately, I had to disclose what had happened. My husband had discovered the truth. When I informed them, they responded, "Oh dear," but that was all they said. They didn't want to get involved in a marital fight. I had only given my phone number to 2 of my dates, but I had gotten along well with Victor, another of my American clients, who was nearly 60 but in great shape and a good lover. I had known him since before I met Jake, and I suppose I had some deep feelings for him, though nothing like I had for Jake. Victor was married, and I had even met his wife, though I was introduced as a junior business contact. "Sorry, Victor," I murmured as I heard his voice. "I'm not accessible right now." "Might not be for a while." "Elite Circle told me your bad news," he remarked over the phone, causing me to cry. "Do you need someone to speak to?" Victor continued. "Let's meet someplace. Maybe I can help." "Oh, Victor. Please no. Do not ask me out. I'm in no condition to give you what you want," I murmured, my voice shaking. "Payback time," he replied gently. "I did something for you, not the other way around. There will be no fooling around. I promise. Meet me at the normal location." "No, not there," I said. "I'll come up to Cambridge." "Where do you recommend?" 5 hours later, I was sat in front of Victor, and he began questioning me. "Do you want him to come back?" he asked first, to which I answered that of course I did, but there appeared to be little possibility. "If not, then I would be more than delighted to. Well, you know that Polly and I haven't been getting along so well for some time now." I stopped him, saying, "Please, Victor, do not take me down that road. I like you, okay? I adore you in certain ways, but you are not Jake." "Sorry, but you're not Jake." Victor nodded sadly. "I expected that, Lena. I apologize, but I had to ask. I needed to get it out of the way," he said. I smiled at him. He was so nice. "Jake won't speak to me. He simply won't speak to me. I do not know what to do. I don't understand how, if he loved me, he could let me go like that." Victor shook his head and continued, "I don't believe you know how badly you've ruined him. His entire world, young lady." "But he simply doesn't understand," I said. "It was just sex. Just what I needed, excitement. It's like a narcotic, and I can't seem to function without it. Going out with a variety of guys all the time, never knowing who I'd be sleeping with from one week to the next. I can't seem to explain it to anyone." I poured out my sorrows, telling how, even after I'd stopped after being married, I'd ended up unhappy after just 8 months or so with only one partner, as amazing as he was, and how, as much as I loved him, it was all about sex. "Just sex," I whispered. "Was it Victor?" Victor wasn't asking, he was wondering whether I had gotten my sentiments correctly. I thought about it, remembered what it was like to be with Jake, remembered the feelings with which we made love. Yes, made love, not just sex. I was kidding myself, though it had often been just sex with most of them, an adventure to participate in and forget. With Victor and a few others, it had been far more. "Do you recall how you reacted when you found out I went with one of the other females while you were on vacation?" Victor questioned softly, reminding me of how upset I had been, how I had raged and yelled at him, sulked for a few weeks, and even been harsh with young Jake, who was so innocent. "Can you imagine how Jake is feeling now? Could you imagine how much terrible things must be for him?" When I glanced up at Victor, the knowledge of what I had done to Jake, how unspeakably evil I had been, came pouring me, and I began weeping, but not for myself, but for him, my husband, my love, and I sobbed like I'd never cried before. Victor grabbed me in his arms and rocked me gently as I wailed like a baby, whispering, "I can't imagine what I can do, but I'll try. I only hope he thinks of you as much as I do. I'd do anything, absolutely anything, to have even a little chance of winning Jake back. I'd struggle against my want to go with other guys, praying to God that I'd be strong enough to resist. To have the resolve to declare, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And I'd get started right away. Yes, I would. Straight away. I will tell him to stop removing the buttons on my blouse. I will, I am determined. I will. I will advise him to halt immediately. Right now. Right now. I paused. I did it because I love Jake. I rose up and walked home, still in my thoughts and feeling the anguish. I badly wanted to see Jake, but I couldn't find him. I tried calling him, but his phone was turned off. 3 days later, I was at my mother's house when a guy dressed in a suit knocked on the door. I answered it, and the man said, "Are you Mrs. Lena Harper?" I nodded. "You've been served," he said, giving me the manila envelope, and walked away. It was what I was dreading. I knew I'd lost Jake forever. I fought the divorce for 7 months, but Jake never gave in, and the judge granted his wishes. Jake never spoke to me again, and I never married or dated again. Jake, on the other hand, moved to a different state and is now engaged to a school teacher. Life goes on, but for me, it has taken a dark turn. Thank you for watching Lena and Jake's journey. Do you believe Lena can ever find redemption? Please share your opinions in the comments and remember to like and subscribe.